On today's Locked On Bucks, we take a look at the best five-man groups for the Milwaukee Bucks. Which players need to play together the most, and do they need to adjust their starting lineup? Camille and I dig into it coming up next.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day and for checking out the Locked On Bucks newsletter. If you have not done so yet, you can sign up for free at lockedondaily.com to start your day with the all-new free Locked On Bucks newsletter. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Well, Camille, the win last night, which you and Frank broke down in Toronto, we saw the Bucks go back to a familiar starting lineup with Khris Middleton out, and that's where things started to get interesting. I know there's been a clamoring now of some fans that would like to see Taurean Prince back in the starting lineup, or I suppose I'm jumping to assumptions there. They just don't want Khris Middleton in the starting lineup is the gist of what I'm getting. I will grant you the numbers have not been pretty with that group together, and certainly not what you would expect to see if we just look at it. And granted, it's a very small sample size with Khris only having played in 10 games so far this season. But the minutes where Dame, Giannis, and Khris are on the floor together, spots where the Bucks were elite last season, they have a 104.3 offensive rating. That is in the 7th percentile.
Yes,
a 111.1 defensive rating, which is just slightly worse than their overall defense, which is a top 10 defense in the league. But the offense has just been brutal, and it's a negative net rating in those spots. Last year, as we mentioned, this is where this team was really excelling. You would point to, hey, with their starting lineup, with their best players on the floor, they've been at their best. It has not been the case this season. I mean, that's a small sample size, but we've talked about it with Frank before too, the on-off splits with Giannis and Damian Lillard. It's just tough to explain. The Khris Middleton one, we talked about before we started recording. I'm willing to grant a little more leniency because it's been so early in his return, but the returns you're getting have not been what you expected.
No, they haven't yet. And that's with me saying that as somebody who said, hey, listen, Khris is coming back. It's going to be clunky for a little bit. Like, I knew that reintegrating him into the lineup, it was going to be some growing pains in the process. I thought that was going to be more so on the side defensively for the Bucks in the game. And I mean, we've talked about Khris Middleton's lateral quickness, how that has declined since that championship year. In early returns that we've seen with him so far this season, there have been times where he's getting beat off the dribble very easily, which is a little concerning to see, but also makes me wonder, do we then see more of those small ball lineups when you move Khris up and he's, your small ball 4 and lineups next to Giannis? And how does that look given the chemistry that they have together? But that's the baffling thing about this Bucks team right now. It's like, why is the offense struggling right now? And I too am willing to give Khris a bit more time. I'm not sitting here like trade him, do all this other stuff. I'm even willing to say like, hey, maybe him coming off the bench might end up being a better thing for this team, which prior I was staunchly against that notion, but they have to figure something out. And the part of the reason I'm giving them some grace as well, it's just the circumstance. Like, he got his first start with Giannis and Dame out of the lineup. They come back. They're getting back over their illness. They're not looking or playing the way that we saw the two of them play, Giannis and Dame, coming back from those illnesses as they were ramping back up. So I think part of it is just like you're starting a lineup switch while you have guys coming back who haven't been feeling well, who are trying to get back into shape, and it might be some lowering pains with that. So I'm like a few more weeks, I think, just to kind of see with the guys getting their rhythm back and Khris in that lineup. What does that look like?
I'm really on the fence because I agree with the overall point that I want to see more of a sample size with Khris Middleton with this group, but I'm not going to say, look, everything worked, because they started the season 2-8,
Right.
But with that group, once they started to kind of find their footing and some of the mistakes they were making earlier started to go away, that group that they had of Giannis and Dame and Taurean Prince, and it was interchangeable at the 2 guard, but then you kind of settled on some things, and Brook Lopez really started to make some headway. And, if we just look at, we gave the numbers for Khris on the floor with that duo in Giannis and Dame. Offense has been brutal. The defense has been okay. With Taurean Prince in spot of Khris Middleton. So Damian Lillard, Giannis, and Taurean Prince on the floor together. Their offense has been more than 10 points per 100 possessions better at a 114.6. The defense, essentially the same, about a point worse at a 112.4 rating. And I think that's what stands out the most. And I get the argument that I'm not saying you're making, but would go along with your point of let's give Khris some more time, in that Taurean Prince is the guy that has been most impacted by Khris Middleton's because he was playing 30 minutes plus per game prior to that. You could make a case that's probably more than the Bucks wanted to play him, but he found his role. And you go back to media day when he talked about checking out all the catch and shoot opportunities. I don't know if it was second spectrum or cleaning the glass or what that he was going to, but he looked at all that to see, okay, where do guys get the ball when Giannis is on the floor? Where does he like to pass it? What are some of these options? And how can I excel as a catch and shoot guy? That's what we saw. He was 55%, 56% before Khris came back. None of us expect him to stay at that rate. But since December 6th, prior to last night at least, or that Raptors game, he was shooting 31%, I believe, on threes. You can't tell me it wasn't not only the minutes reduction, but the fact that his minutes with Giannis and Damian Lillard were reduced. And that's just going to open up so many more clean looks and catch and shoot opportunities. So I think you've seen the impact that it's put on Taurean Prince. And to your point of Khris Middleton, last year we saw him basically running the offense for the second unit, that he does seem like more of a glue guy. He has that chemistry with Giannis where, we said with Khris gone, man, nobody can really throw him the lobs. But to me, it just feels like I think I can make Khris work just about anywhere, but I can't believe I'm saying this and stressing the importance of Taurean Prince, but we saw an optimized Taurean Prince and how much of a difference it made for this team early in the season.
Because it's the shot quality as well. If you look at just the raw stats for Taurean Prince, like the amount of shots that he's getting up hasn't drastically changed.
Hasn't changed, yeah.
Like it hasn't drastically. It's the quality of the shots that he's been able to get up when he's on the floor, and also part of Doc earlier in the season telling Taurean Prince you can do more than just shoot threes and having to be like, all right, now a little bit too much of not shooting the threes, like a little too much.
It hasn't reached Malik Beasley territory when anytime he did anything other than take one dribble or catch and shoot.
Yeah. Adventure time showing up at that situation. But I think it's something to really look at though for the Bucks going forward in that role and just the quality of shots. Like if you're finding which guys work the best in these small sample sizes of like, hey, the Taurean Prince, Giannis, Damians are really good. We got to try to maximize this, but also knowing like, hey, Khris and Giannis, just those two alone, what do these minutes look like? And maybe you're trying to stagger it a bit more that way as well, with you're getting more of Chris's minutes paired with Giannis because of the chemistry that they have offensively and how they're just so used to playing with one another. And you see it when Khris on the court and just the amount of assists that he's able to get to Giannis, just the easier looks. So maybe it's just that type of tinkering with the roster at this point. But I think for now, you keep starting Khris at least for another week or two, like a couple weeks, I think, given the fact that we're a month out from the trade deadline. So the Bucks are going to have to really start figuring out what they currently have and if there's anything they feel like they're missing, and then try to figure out if they can go and get that somewhere else. So decision time is coming quickly, but if they make the decision to bring Khris off the bench, that does not mean that's the decision in perpetuity. Like you can always go back. You don't want to do a whole lot of, messing with stuff, but you have the luxury to do that as well. It's not set in stone.
It's going to be interesting to see the starters for that game tonight against the Spurs, because Doc seemed to somewhat leave the door open. I want to go back to his comments that he made Saturday night after that tough loss to the Blazers, and then again before that Raptors game. And we mentioned before, just finding the right group. So what has been the 5-man grouping that has been the most optimized for this Bucks team? We will take a look at that coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. I want to talk to you now about our brand new mobile game that we're all really excited about, Ultimate College Basketball HC. If you've ever dreamed of being a college basketball head coach, this is your chance to step into those shoes. In Ultimate College Basketball HC, you control every detail of your program, from recruiting players and hiring coaching staff to overseeing training camps, handling NIL deals, and managing scholarships. It is all in your hands. And when it comes to game time, you get to draw up offensive plays and set your strategy. The way you play won't just affect the current season, it will shape the future of your school's basketball program. It's a game that lets you feel the full weight of what it means to be a head coach and lead your team to glory. Here's a special offer for Locked On NBA listeners. Use promo code LOCKEDONCBB. All capital letters, Locked On CBB, inside the game store to get a free boost for your program. It is the perfect way to kickstart your coaching career. To download Ultimate College Basketball HC, just visit ultimate-cbb.com or look it up in the app stores. Ultimate College Basketball HC. Begin your coaching legacy today. So after that game against the Blazers on Saturday night, Doc Rivers seemed to somewhat leave the door open and said, you know, we were bringing Khris off the bench and talking about Taurean Prince, what we just mentioned basically, that it's impacted him. And we were bringing Khris off the bench and we were rolling. So you definitely have to look at everything. You know, nothing is off the table. I wouldn't say he backpedaled, but before the game against the Raptors, when Khris Middleton was out, he did say it's too early to really think about it, but we are talking about all this stuff at all the time. We just have to do what's best for the team. There's a lot of ways you can look at things. You could have a set rotation, or you could go game to game. That I've seen coaches do it both ways. I've seen coaches successful both ways. I've seen coaches struggle with both ways. So I think all eyes are going to be on the starting lineup tomorrow to see, okay, we heard Doc say, yeah, we're thinking about it, or essentially tiptoe around. Maybe we'll make a change to maybe we won't. So let's see what the Bucks go with when they take on the Spurs. But the larger discussion, not just the starters, of looking at these groups that have been the best for the Bucks. And I know, I think it was after that Blazers game, Frank was talking about this and tweeting about this too with the Bucks starters. And, you know, everybody, as he pointed out, is running to the assumption of, well, Khris Middleton's the problem, put Taurean Prince back in there, and that's the change. But as Frank pointed out, are we sure we shouldn't look at changing the two guard because of what AJ Green has brought? He came into the season, we assumed it was going to be Gary Trent Jr.
Yeah.
But to me, when you look at some of these numbers, and I think Frank suggested AJ Green and what he's done with this group, a couple of things stand out about AJ Green playing with your two most important players. So this isn't just the starting lineup that we're looking at, but the minutes where AJ Green is on the floor with Giannis and Damian Lillard. The Bucks are in the 99th percentile of field goal attempts at the rim. So in other words, you have the gravity of Damian Lillard, you have the shooting ability of AJ Green. It opens things up a lot more for Giannis. I mean, you're still going to double Giannis more so than you're going to, you know, pay attention or double AJ Green, but it helps your spacing immensely. And that's one of the big discussions we've had around Andre Jackson Jr. in the starting lineup. Their efficiency, same story. They're in the 99th percentile of effective field goal percentage in those minutes with that trio on the floor together, shooting just under 61% from that rate. And corner threes, they've been the best team in the league at knocking those down with some of the looks that they're generating. Again, getting to the rim and finding some open looks. So everything that you can point to shows, hey, these guys have been really good together. A 120.6 offensive rating. Man. Very, very good. Defense has been 107.9 with that trio. And we've talked about AJ Green's defense and how much it has really been stable for this group. So that three-man grouping has been, if not the best, one of the best we've seen from the Bucks this season. It just leads you to thinking, I'd really like to see more of that group together.
Yeah, more of it is like something that I'd also be interested in. And the question is, if you're not getting more of that by inserting him into the starting lineup, then like, do you find a way to increase AJ's minutes even more than where he currently is, just to continue to have him on the court more often with those guys so that you continue to have his spacing as well as the defense? Now, For AJ this season, especially over like the last few weeks, the fouling has been of an increase for him. And I feel like a lot of things I'm seeing with AJ Green this year are things that I saw with Andre Jackson Jr. last year, where you're getting these fouls because you're not able to you're moving your feet as quickly. You're putting too much body on guys, a little bit too much contact, not moving your feet the way you need to be. And happens sometimes when you're just getting that step off a little bit too slow against penetration. So young guys, you got to continue to build because we see the tools that AJ Green has. And the fact that we're talking about AJ Green as one of the best Bucks defender, had you told me that 2 years ago, I would have been like, are you sure that two-way guy is the one who you're talking, the guy we brought in to be a shooter? That's the guy you're talking about? So like, he doesn't have you bleeding points defensively. The fouling has been a problem more of late, but the problem with the Bucks as a whole has been that offense, which, as we continue to say, has been the shocker. So if AJ Green is one of those levers you can pull that can help facilitate the offense a bit better, I think you got to find a way to get more of those minutes. And as for Andre Jackson Jr., who is somebody who has come in as that starting two guard for the Bucks for the defensive purposes, it's not as if he's getting many minutes a night. Yeah. Like, it's like he's starting, you're kind of seeing how the game flows and how defenses are playing off of him. And then you're making decisions on how much you play him thereafter. And for Ajax, his growth has to continue being just elevating that offensive game and finding ways to be a threat when teams are trying to play off of him. How do you utilize him better? So there's some learning curves, I think, with both of those young guys that are still happening. For AJ, it's continuously, getting the feet moving defensively. He's so solid offensively. And then for Andre, it's just kind of like figuring out that offensive piece a little bit more. But I think both guys have been valuable. I'm not sure if you have the numbers with Ajax in front of you, but like, how do those splits look with Andre Jackson Jr. in comparison to the ones that you mentioned with AJ Green?
So I just had it up. Give me 1 second here, but I'll point this out too. I mentioned that was just looking at the three guys, right? But there are a few caveats that are interesting. So if we look at AJ Green with that group and either one of your quote unquote preferred starters set. So AJ Green on the floor with Damian Lillard, Giannis, Brook Lopez, and Taurean Prince. They are a plus 26 net rating, a 114 offensive rating, still not where you would hope to be, but an 87.6 defensive rating. If you swap that out for Khris Middleton and go with AJ Green, Dame, Khris Middleton, Giannis, and Brook Lopez, they have a 138.5 offensive rating, but a 133.3 defensive rating. And the caveat there is we have seen that very, very little minutes and possessions so far this season. With Ajax and that trio together, or Ajax and those two guys, and Damian Lillard and Giannis, they're a 114.8 offensive rating and a 111.2 defensive rating, which is, not far off defensively from where they currently rank. And I don't think the 114 is far off from where they are. So they've been about average, about playing to their average with that on the floor. And as you mentioned too, it's been interesting with Andre, and I don't mean it in a bad way. It's kind of like in baseball when we see teams go away from starter to just like, he's going to start the game, but he's not a starter.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it feels like we're seeing with Andre Jackson Jr., that you just look at of late. He's played about, I would guess, 13 or so minutes a game in their last handful of games here. But month by month, when you look at his splits in January, I just had it up. I think he's averaging 13 minutes per game. In December, he was averaging 17. In November, it was like 22. So it has gradually gone down. And that, as we said from the start of the season, that was going to be the big challenge is, I know your defense is going to open the door for you, but the way to stay on the floor is your offense. I do think he's made some strides with aggressiveness and figuring out how to attack in the paint. But that's all well and good. He still needs a shot in the minutes that he's on the floor with Giannis. Like, I'm not saying you can't find a role in this league if that's your offense, but it's tough to play alongside Giannis when that's your offense.
And that's one of the things that's like the juxtaposition of like having a young guy and trying to get those young guys minutes, and why for years, with the Bucks, we've said like they're going to lean on their vets because they don't have the time to be working with a young guy trying to figure some things out because they're trying to win games. And that emphasis, that or infusion of youth into the lineup here for the Bucks with Andre, with AJ Green, and more recently now with Ryan Rollins as well, there are going to be those learning curve moments in the game. And the question is going to be consistently going forward is like, how much of an appetite do the Bucks maintain to have of having that patience of letting these young guys grow and figure the things that they need to figure out by that valuable playing time? Because you learn the things by playing the game and getting those minutes and getting those reps consistently. And it's like, how much patience do you have? And I think so far this season, you've seen it's a pretty long leash because they've shown that they can do things for this team that are going to be beneficial for them. There's reasons why they've jumped certain guys in the lineup at this moment in the year. And I'll be curious to see going forward, especially with Andre Jackson Jr. and that offense coming along, because we've heard Doc say, I have confidence that part will get figured out. Like almost as if like having the intensity and the energy that he has defensively, that's the hard part. We can figure out how to get him effective, looks offensively and how to utilize him that way. But right now, it's just time to grow. So I'll be curious to continue to see how much patience they continue to have for the development, especially now as we're getting closer to All-Star break and that final push towards the playoffs.
Some other numbers to throw out there when we look at the 5-man groupings for the Bucks, and curious your thoughts as well. So leave your thoughts in the comments. What's the starting 5 that you want to see the Bucks roll with here? And we'll address those in the coming days here on the show. So we'll get to some additional thoughts on some numbers that have really stood out with this group and take a look at some of the rumors and the chatter that took place earlier this week, coming up after the break here on Locked On Bucks. Time to talk to you now about Game Time. I love going to live events, sports, music, theater, and comedy. Some of my favorite memories, attending concerts, sporting events. This past year, I got to see the St. Louis Blues at Fiserv Forum. I got a few concert trips planned on the horizon here this spring, and I'm able to do so with the help of Game Time. Now, Game Time has made it even easier to get the tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. That is LOCKEDONNBA to score $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. So a few other interesting things to point out about fun with numbers here, we'll say, Camille. This isn't lineup per se. I think you'd be able to easily guess 2 of them, but if I asked you by the numbers with the on-off efficiency, who have been the 5 best defensive players for the Bucks this season? Who would you say?
I would go Brook, Giannis, Ajax. I would AJ Green. And then the 5th one would be Prince.
You got 3 of them.
3. Okay. Who was the 5?
Brook Lopez is number 1. DeLon Wright is number 2.
Wouldn't have guessed that.
Andre Jackson Jr., number 3 in the defensive rating performance when they're on the floor versus off. AJ Green and Ryan Rollins checking in there as the 5th best. So some of it matches the eye test, and we talked about DeLon Wright. Like, that's what you brought him here for. The offense, a totally different conversation, but we've seen flashes of it. But to me, it just really illustrates what, thankfully, we haven't had to have the conversation of that. I know we fought those battles in years past. The value of Brook Lopez. And look, I know he didn't close games. His minutes were down for a handful of games there. It's not just Brook. It's a handful of guys in this league. It is matchup dependent, but I think, and we heard Doc even talk about this after the Blazers game, of his regret of not closing with Brook Lopez and a couple other guys when you had the chance to make a sub to a defensive lineup after you took that 2-point lead and instead give up a 3-point play to Anthony Simons, that you feel like he doesn't easily attack the rim if Brook Lopez is on the floor. So I think Brook is really not that it's the first time he's doing it, but this year he's really demonstrated his value on that end of the floor. I mentioned in wrapping here, a couple other things to touch on. Well, I do want to touch on the Spurs very quickly. I think it's the most anticipated matchup so far.
Yeah.
Maybe not because of the quality of the team, but to just see Victor Wembanyama versus Giannis. We did not get to see Wemby in Milwaukee last year. It was just the San Antonio game. That game did not disappoint.
It's fantastic.
Where he and Giannis were dueling. I think Giannis finished with 41. You had Wemby blocking him under the rim, and they were trading baskets down the stretch. So very, very much looking forward to that one. We mentioned the Spurs neck and neck with the Bucks defensively in a lot of numbers. Their offense has been close to a bottom 10 offense. It's almost entirely centered around Victor Wembanyama. But if you haven't seen much of him this year, the hype is real. Like that Christmas Day game, he is averaging 4 blocked shots per game. He led the league in blocked shots per game a year ago, and he's averaging 4 this season, which would be the most in NBA history since Dikembe Mutombo in 1996. So it is a highly anticipated matchup, and we're going to have to wait for it with an 8:30 tip at Fiserv Forum. But the news that came out of this week and the rumors, Jimmy Butler suspended 7 games by the Miami Heat. I know you had some thoughts on Heat culture and how you have to do by the players and everything we heard from Miami Heat fans last summer. But before we do touch on that, how surprised, and I'll say this, it's a very well-sourced reporter, John Gambadaro in Phoenix. How surprised were you to see him specifically list the Bucks as one of those 2 teams that was kicking the tires and having conversations with the Miami Heat?
Not too surprised. I feel like part of being a GM, you pick up the phone, you make a call, you figure out just out of curiosity, what would it look like?
I don't think they can get him. I didn't think they could get Dame Lillard.
Yeah. Like, listen, the NBA over the last few years has taught me, if anything, you can't rule out the impossible until you don't see it happen. But for Jimmy Butler, I'm not surprised that the Bucks is one of the teams that was listed as, being interested in his services. You see what Toronto did with the 1-year rental of Kawhi Leonard, of thinking like, we might not be able to keep you long-term, but our window is now. And we've had a lot of conversations about what the window of this particular Bucks team and this roster is. To me, the Jimmy Butler move would feel like one of like, not desperation, that's not the right word, but like we're going all in, like we're pushing all of our chips in. We're going in on it this year. Like, this is the year we think we can do it. We think Jimmy can, be that missing piece. We're going for it. I don't know if that's the way that I would move, just given what's all going on around Jimmy Butler, 35 years old, really want some big money. Is it worth giving up assets for a 1-year rental, half a season rental, really, at this point? And you just saw last year how difficult it can be to incorporate those new pieces on the fly. So I don't know if I would do it, but I'm not surprised to see that the Bucks were one of the teams that were calling. Were you surprised?
No, for the same reasons that you mentioned. Like, you have to at least, hey, what are you looking for here? Yeah. Like, maybe we have something that'll work. Maybe you're just ready to get rid of him and say, all right, we're done with it. Fine. First person that offers us something, we'll take it. And again, like, it's not just the Dame thing. Like, think year over year when we had similar conversations, everybody wanted Jay Crowder. Hard to believe a year ago, but everybody wanted Jay Crowder. I didn't think the Bucks had the assets to get him. They got him. PJ Tucker, the year they won the championship. Like, yeah, it'd be great. I don't think we have enough in what Houston would want. They got him. So these are the types of conversations that you have to have. I do wonder, this is one of the more interesting situations we've had, because it seems like both teams are ready to dig their heels in and say, or both sides, I should say, and say, no, we're winning this one. Like, Jimmy doesn't want to be there. Trade me. The Heat, we're not letting you push us over here. As you mentioned, it's not an expiring contract, but he has the player option.
Yep.
So I'm curious to see what the package is to get him. And if it's simply a give us cap flexibility, if you're the Miami Heat, and that's what you're looking for. Because in terms of assets, his age and the walk factor, it's not going to yield as much as a trade like that traditionally would, you would think. That's where it does open the door for teams like the Bucks to say, well, if we can cobble these things together, and it's a much longer discussion. I've had this with a few people in the last few days. I was just talking with Van Fayez, a brew hoop, about it the other day too. Like, there are ways in this CBA that the Bucks can actually do this. Like, you can aggregate deals if that deal gets you underneath the second apron. So it's not an immediate non-starter here, but it's incredibly difficult. And having said all that, even with, hey, the Heat want cap flexibility, if that's what they're willing to take in exchange for Jimmy Butler, the Bucks can't really offer that, because even the contracts you in theory would cobble together are not expiring deals. They also have player options. So I don't see it being a fit, but I mean, it's the type of moves, or it's the type of calls that you have to make if you're John Horst. I mentioned, though, you had some thoughts on, boy, isn't it funny when it works this way for Miami Heat fans?
It is, because all last year you were hearing, Heat fans talk about Damian Lillard and how, well, Dame said he wants to go to Miami. Like, it has to be Miami. It has to be Miami. Honor him. He's a franchise legend. Honor him. Do what he wants. And now Jimmy Butler saying, I want to go to Phoenix. And I'm not hearing Heat fans saying, well, that's what he wants, so let's honor it, because he's done so much for our franchise over the last 5 years that he's been here. They just don't want Bradley Beal. And I can understand it, but like, keep the same energy.
Bradley Beal, by the way, $50.2 million is his salary for this year. Goes up to 53 next year. Then I think he has the player option the year after that at 57 million. But more importantly, he has the no trade clause. And you have to assume, we mentioned the struggles that Phoenix has had of late. They've been the inverse of the Bucks since an 8-1 start. I have to believe part of it is the performance on the court. Another part of shifting Bradley Beal and Yusuf Nurkic to the bench is, sure you guys want to be here? Like, sure you don't want to waive your no trade clause? So that would match up in terms of the salary. If I'm Miami Heat, look, Jimmy wants to go to Phoenix. Great. We don't want Bradley Beal. We want Devin Booker, because that one also matches up in terms of the salary. So it is, I would assume, I don't know about you as we wrap here, do you think he's traded before this quote unquote suspension ends next Friday?
I don't know if it's that soon. I know the trade deadline is like a month away from as we're recording this. I think that it's done by the end of January. So like a week or so before the trade deadline, I can see them finally figure that out. And just for my 2 cents, the Jimmy Butler destination that I'm most intrigued about, especially after hearing him say like he has no interest in going to Memphis because they can't pay him in Memphis, whatever. Houston is that team for me, for Jimmy Butler, where it's like, if they can find a way to do that, maybe you send out Dylan Brooks and some other pieces there, keep a lot of that young talent and get Jimmy over there. That's one where I'm like, I'm kind of interested in seeing how that would play out.
As follow-up, do you think he plays for the Heat again?
No, but it could be interesting if the Heat want to play the hardball route and go kind of like how the Clippers did with Paul George. Like, we're going to keep you all this year. They're not the same apples to apples, because Paul George was playing and not discontent in that way. But just letting him walk in the offseason, then using all that cap space of like, okay, we're going to just try to, figure out how we can cobble together something here.
There's a lot more behind it when you look at the assets the Heat have given up too. Like, they're in trouble with some of the draft picks that they've for previous trades. The Terry Rozier one is looking like a disaster. I forget what the deal was. A couple years ago that eventually turned into their first round pick, I believe this season, unprotected, goes to the Oklahoma City Thunder. And it's a Heat team that could be in the lottery. So they've had a lot of, we can get on the Bucks for some of the moves they made, but Miami has had a lot of asset mismanagement these past few years as well. I would lean towards, I don't think he plays for Miami again. Like, even if he's not traded before the suspension, if it's a mutual, we agree you'll be away from the team until we can find a deal, I am kind of leaning towards that. But look, later tonight, a very highly anticipated game between the Bucks and the San Antonio Spurs. It is going to be a late night recap because it's an 8:30 tip, but it certainly should be a fun one. We'll be back tomorrow on the show with the recap of the Bucks Spurs game. And as mentioned, leave your thoughts as well. What's the starting five you think the Bucks should go with? For Camille, I'm Justin. We will talk to you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.